Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
On behalf of the Attitude team, I would like to thank you for joining today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Gaslighting, Love Bombing, and Beyond: How to Recognize and End Toxic Relationships with ADHD. No one is immune to a toxic relationship. However, individuals with ADHD may be more likely to fall victim to gaslighting and love bombing. Why? Feelings of low self-esteem, guilt, shame, and prior relationship challenges serve as targets for manipulation and control by abusers. Educating yourself on warning signs and patterns of toxicity can help protect you from emotional abuse. Today, we will learn how to identify red flags in a partner, a family member, friend, or in the workplace. We will discuss the phases of a typical unhealthy relationship, why people with ADHD are more susceptible to emotional abuse, and how to protect yourself from the grasp of a toxic person. Leading today's presentation is the expert in relationships touched by ADHD, Dr. Stephanie Sarkis. Dr. Sarkis is an AMHCA diplomat and clinical mental health specialist in child and adolescent counseling, one of 20 therapists in the U.S. with this dual designation. She's also a national certified counselor, licensed mental health counselor, qualified LMHC supervisor, and Florida Supreme Court certified family and circuit civil court mediator. Dr. Sarkis is the best-selling author of several books we would recommend, including Gaslighting, Recognize Manipulative and Emotionally Abusive People and Break Free. Also, Healing from Toxic Relationships, 10 Essential Steps to Recover from Gaslighting, Narcissism, and Emotional Abuse, and 10 Simple Solutions to Adult ADHD. Dr. Sarkis is a contributor to Psychology Today, Forbes, and the Huffington Post, as well as Attitude. She maintains a private practice in Tampa, Florida, where she specializes in ADHD, anxiety disorders, and gaslighting. Before I hand over the microphone to Dr. Sarkis, I have just a few housekeeping items. Those of you tuned into the live webinar, you can submit your questions at any time for the expert. Just navigate to the text box under the video player. To download the slides, click on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you are interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in an email you will receive about an hour after the live broadcast. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 410 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the Certificate of Attendance option. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine. If you do so now, you will receive our forthcoming fall issue, which features an article from Dr. Sarkis on the topic of love bombing, among many others. Okay, finally, the sponsor of this webinar is Inflow. Inflow is the #1 app to help you manage your ADHD. Developed by leading clinicians, Inflow is a science-based self-help program based on the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. Click on the link on your screen to download it now on the App Store and Google Play Store. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without any further ado, I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Sarkis. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this really important discussion.
Well, thank you, Annie. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone that's attending today. I appreciate that too. I think it's really important that we learn more about toxic relationships and how to protect ourselves from them, especially when we have ADHD. And also, speaking as a person with ADHD, we'll talk a little bit about why we may be more susceptible to people that may not be making decisions in our best interest. So thank you very much, Annie. So we're going to talk a little bit about what gaslighting is. So gaslighting is a series of manipulation tactics. It's used to make you feel like your sense of reality isn't correct. So you'll have someone that will say to you, what you saw and what you heard isn't what happened. They will do something called projection, where they will be doing a bad behavior and then blame you for that same behavior. So they may obsessively accuse you of cheating. They may say to you, you're 5 minutes late from work. I know that you're going out with people, or they're asking to look at your phone when in fact they've been cheating. So you'll see quite a bit of projection from gaslighters. You also see them use what I call invisible armies. So they will say, this person thinks that you are, the worst, or, everybody at my work thinks that you're crazy, or everybody, in this friend group thinks that you're crazy. So they use these, invisible people. And if you ask for details about who exactly said this, they'll make something up, or they will be very vague about who said these things. So again, that's called invisible armies that they use. They tend to do things that will make you want to rely on them for their version of reality. So they'll say, you know what, you have ADHD, so they weaponize it. They say, well, you have ADHD, so that means that you can't be trusted. So I need to take over the finances. This is different than you having some issues with financial management, and the two of you get together and decide that, that you're going to have the other person do the money management software. Because if you are having issues with money management, the healthy thing in a relationship is for the two of you to work together, and you have equal access to that information. You have equal access to those assets, equal access to the software. It's just that you prefer that the other person takes that over. In an abusive relationship where there's gaslighting, what you'll see happen is the other person is hiding money from you. They will not let you see it. They are doing what I call sneaky spending, where they are buying big ticket items, putting them under your name, misusing your credit. So that gets into something called economic financial abuse. And I have seen that in this type of relationship. So gaslighting is a form of emotional abuse. So if you look at different forms of abuse, there's sexual abuse, physical abuse, financial, economic abuse, psychological abuse. Again, this is part of emotional abuse, which is a form of domestic violence. So we are talking about domestic violence today. And emotional abuse can be just as damaging, if not more, than physical abuse. There are several studies now showing that emotional abuse can leave much more lasting damage, including PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, than even other forms of domestic violence. So again, this is a form of emotional abuse, domestic violence. And also the other thing that you'll see with gaslighting too is that when you try to leave this person, they will at first maybe act like it's not a big deal that you're leaving, but you're shutting off their attention center. So people like this tend to want someone that is attending to all their needs, and there's no one that could fill anybody's 100% needs. It just doesn't happen. So they will try to suck you back into the relationship, and that's called hoovering, named after the vacuum. So they will promise you things that maybe they weren't fulfilling in the relationship. So let's say that you wanted to have kids and they didn't. Then they're all of a sudden like, well, I'm thinking I've changed my mind about that. I want to have kids. They'll never usually apologize for their behavior because they don't feel they did anything wrong. But they will promise you things that they didn't before. There's something called future faking, which is where they will come up with these great ideas of what's going to happen in the future, but those never come to fruition. And when you bring that up to them and you say, hey, we talked about, going on this vacation together, they will say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. Or they'll blame it on you and say, well, because of the behavior you'd had, I don't know if I want to go on vacation with you. I don't know if I feel safe going on vacation with you. And they never intended to go on vacation with you to begin with. So they will do things called future faking. And again, that's part of hoovering, where they try to suck you back in. And we'll talk a little bit about what the best way to respond to this is, because if you do go back to the relationship, it may start out that you are having this honeymoon phase to your relationship, but eventually it goes right back to where it was before with the same amount of abuse, and then it starts increasing. So we'll talk a little bit more too about just the nature of this type of abuse, that it starts off very slowly. And it can be very difficult to spot this kind of person because in the beginning, it seems like everything's fine. So you do see love bombing in the beginning of these relationships. And love bombing is when you have someone that is being too good to be true. So you go out to dinner with this person, or you're at a job interview. They tell you that you're the best candidate for the job they've ever interviewed. They tell you that they've never felt like this about anybody. They push you to move in right away. They push you at a job interview to accept the job right away. And if you have ADHD and you feel also like some level of social anxiety, which is very common with ADHD, you may feel like, wow, somebody accepts me. I haven't really felt accepted. I felt like there's been something wrong with my brain, so I haven't been accepted. And so when someone tells you that now they accept you for who you are, they even find your ADHD endearing, that can be a real pull for us, right? Because you have someone that's now saying to you, I accept you for who you are, when a lot of times you may not have felt that. So we have to be very cautious when someone seems too good to be true. This person will shower you with gifts. They'll do something called grand gestures where they will go above and beyond. And this tends to be romanticized in movies and shows where you've got someone that does they send 1,000 flowers to someone, or they do, surprise visits. And in concept, yeah, that sounds great, but it's also a red flag. When you have people that have to show grand gestures, they're demonstrative to that degree, it can also be controlling. So you want to be careful of that too, when they are doing things that even make you uncomfortable because of the performative nature of it, or they want people to see it. So again, love bombing feels really good in the beginning, and your dopamine's up, and you're feeling great, and your oxytocin's up, your cuddling hormone, and everything's great. And then things start sliding. So what you'll notice, there's an idealization phase. The idealization phase is where things are great. You are put up on a pedestal, but eventually you fall off the pedestal, and it's a long way down. So we'll talk more about that. So triangulating is when you'll see in these types of relationships that the gaslighter will try to pitch you against friends and family. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that your friends and family are the ones that are going to tell you that, hey, I don't know if this relationship's healthy. I don't know if this is a good idea to be around this person. So of course the gaslighter is going to go after those people first. So they'll tell you, hey, your sister said this really horrible thing about you, and I think you have a right to know. I wasn't going to tell you, but you have a right to know. You'll hear a lot of that. Well, I wasn't going to tell you, but you have a right to know. So what they'll do is they'll make up a lie, something that your sister never said about you, but they'll say, oh, your sister said that you're crazy. So you automatically get mad at your sister, right? So you get mad at your sister. You don't talk to her. You talk to her about, she says, I never said that. And you said, I don't know if I believe you. And you start talking less and less to your sister. That's exactly what the gaslighter wants. The gaslighter wants to isolate you from your trusted friends and family. So they will continue to pitch you against people. So they love nothing more than to get drama started, to get you fighting with someone else, because that means that you're going to be spending more time with them because you are isolating yourself due to this person's behavior. So that's called triangulating, when you're talking through somebody rather than directly to that person. So also there's something called splitting, and that's the idealization phase where you are told that you're the best thing ever. If you have someone say to you, you're the best something, whatever, run, right? If they say you're the best, coworker, partner ever, that's a big red flag. Again, it feels good to hear that, especially if you've had relationships that didn't work out well in the past. But when you're told that you're the best ever at anything, you want to run. That's a sign that you're in the idealization phase, because logically you can't be the best ever in things, right? So you're told things that seem too good to be true again. So you'll see after the idealization phase where you're told that you can do no wrong, now you get into the devaluing phase, which is now where you're told that you can do no right. And usually the transition this phase happens when the gaslighter is aware that you are now committed to the relationship. So they know that you are in it. So they will ask you during the relationship, sometimes in the beginning, are you committed? What percentage you is in? How are you feeling about this? They'll constantly try to gauge to see if you are hooked. And once you're hooked, then they'll start commenting about your ADHD, or they'll start commenting about what you're wearing or your body type, things you can't change. and they will constantly poke at it. And if you try to bring up, hey, this behavior you're having is insulting to me and it's hurtful, they will usually point it back at you and do something like, again, weaponize your ADHD and blame that instead. So if it wasn't for your ADHD, I could have a regular conversation with you and things like that. So the discarding phase is when they've either been chronically cheating, which is a very common thing, because again, they need to get that attention. Again, just one person cannot fill this person's need for attention. And they will either drop you like a hot potato, which can be very confusing for people. The grief that you go through at the end of these relationships is much more intense than in other relationships. Or they will come back around and hoover you. If you leave again, they will try to hoover you because they do not want to lose that attention. So you see this kind of behavior in narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, but you can also see it without a disorder present. And people ask me, do people realize they're doing this? I wrote an article for Psychology Today where I talk about how it really doesn't matter how they got to this behavior. It's just that it's abusive. So they're still 100% responsible, because some people I think are just born with what I call bad wiring, and they get dopamine hits for that feel-good brain chemical I was talking about before. They get dopamine hits from getting power and control over people. So, our brains light up when we do a good job at work, or when you play with your kids, or you play with your puppy, or something good happens, and your brain gets a boost of dopamine. What happens in brains that are wired to control and manipulate people is that when they successfully control someone, their dopamine spikes. So the brain wiring is different. You also have people that have learned this behavior from their parents. So they think that this is how relationships work, because when you're a kid, you look to your parents as to how life should go, right? So if you're looking at your parents and seeing that they're using this manipulative behavior, you think that that's kind of how life goes. People that realize that they have a pattern of behavior that is not conducive to healthy relationships and they're seeking help, they're more likely to be able to change their behavior. But if you have someone with a personality disorder, they have what's called egocentric personality, which means that they think everyone else has the problem and they're fine. So if you talk with some narcissistic personality disorder, they'll say, well, what's the problem? Why do you have an issue? I'm fine. So it's very hard to have someone like that go to therapy, because they think that they know more than the therapist. They think that that they are fine and everyone else is crazy. So it's very hard for those people to get help. So the main thing about getting help is you have to want to get help, right? So very important that we look at the fact that regardless of how someone came to this behavior, they're still 100% responsible for it, and it's still abusive behavior. So gaslighting is a pervasive event. This happens across people's relationships. It's not just your relationship with this person. That's happened in previous relationships. It's probably happened in their family of origin. That's the family they grew up with. It's happened with other coworkers. It's happened with other friends. You are not the first person that they've had issues with, or you've had issues with them. They may tell you, I've never had an issue like this with other partners. All my other coworkers love me. That's not true. They've had issues with them, right? So they will idealize former partners as a way to make you feel insecure. So it's not someone that's just in a bad mood. You have a bad day at work and you come home and you're grumbly and you're like, I just want to be left alone. That's not gaslighting. So this is a purposeful manipulation of people. It's not about poor communication, because, with ADHD, sometimes what we're thinking and what we say can be two different things because of that executive function reconstitution of information issue. But this is not just poor communication. This is, again, a concerted effort to make you feel like your version of reality is incorrect and to rely on that person for their version of reality. This is not a temporary event. This isn't something that happens once. This is, again, a concerted effort to build up a case for you to not use your intuition, to not use your judgment to determine that this person's unhealthy. Again, people will tend to be driven towards the gaslighter because the gaslighter is telling them that their version of reality is not correct. It's also not something that you may be able to pick up on. There are overt and covert narcissists. Overt narcissists are the ones we tend to think of where they really command attention and they are maybe more outward with their behavior. Covert narcissists can be very sneaky with their behavior. They may do kind of this aw shucks personality, and they may talk about how other people are taking advantage of them and no one appreciates them at work. And you get along fine with them until you set boundaries. And when you set boundaries, they get angry. And you'll see this type of personality too. If you say no to them, they get what's called a narcissistic rage, where they get so angry that you've defied them that sometimes they get so angry they don't even make sense. So they may start, putting together coherent sentences, and then by the end of their rant, they're just way, off, and you can't figure out even what they were arguing with you about. That's how angry they get. So you can see that sometimes people are really concerned about setting this type of person off because the narcissistic rage gets so bad. Also, they will do something called stonewalling, which is where they will refuse to talk to you. So again, if they feel like you've been what I call, disloyal by saying no to them, they will act like you're not there. They will sit in front of you at the breakfast table and they will not look at you. It's amazing that it's scary that someone can just act like you don't exist. What they want you to do is they want you to clamor for their attention, because that's the high they get, is seeing how much someone will get upset about their behavior. So one of the best things you can do is just to walk off and say, you know what, when someone decides to do that kind of behavior, they're also making a choice about whether they want to be in a relationship with you or not. Then we'll talk about, why are people with ADHD vulnerable to gaslighting toxic relationships? Because we are more likely to get into relationships with people that do not have our best interests in mind. So some of it could be self-esteem. Russell Barkley's done many research studies, including he did a huge study that turned into the book ADHD in Adults, which I highly recommend, where he talks about what a self-esteem hit we take. We are told from a really early age that there's something wrong with us, that we don't think the way other people think. And why can't we just fall in the line? Why can't we work harder? Why can't we, work smarter? Why can't we get organized? And we blame ourselves. So when someone says to you, again, that love bombing phase, you're the best thing ever happened to me, and you got ADHD, and I think that's super cute, and I've wanted somebody with ADHD in my life, and you go, hey, this is pretty good, right? Because you don't see the flip side. And when we meet somebody we really like, those butterflies show up, right? And logic kind of takes a back seat. You're like, oh, you're an axe murderer? We can totally work with that, right? So because when you have those hormones going, and ADHD relationships can tend to start pretty intensely, we tend to not take a step back and go, is this person good for me or not? So this is a little bit different than the ADHD intensity. So because there's that layer of abuse, and ADHD intensity means the relationships start out really intensely and they flame out. This person does not want you to get away from them. So they will use all sorts of manipulation tactics to get you to stay, because they need to siphon off your energy. They need your attention. So also, we tend to look for the best in people. I'm biased, but I think we have great personalities and we're a lot of fun, and we tend to be forgiving of neurodiversity. But this is neurodiversity where it is harmful to you, where they're causing you psychological damage. There's a big distinction with that. Also, we tend to have issues maintaining friendships and relationships. Sometimes it's just that we have a hard time, keeping up with people and returning calls or returning texts because we have all this stuff going on in life. It may also be that we've said something out of turn, or said something and we were like, ooh, maybe that was across the line a little bit. And then you lose friendships or relationships. Lack of acceptance for others. Here's somebody telling you how great you are. Boy, does that feel good, especially when you feel like you just really haven't connected with people. This type of person will also do something called mirroring, which means that they will really, in the beginning, ask you a lot of questions about yourself to try and figure out who you are. And they may even do research about you online, and they will all of a sudden seem to have the same interests as you, even though they really don't have that kind of background. So if you like canoeing, all of a sudden this person says that they are totally into canoeing, and they name all these canoes. And I'm just making this up. I don't know if there's different types of canoes, but you go, oh wow, this person likes the same stuff I do. But what they've done is they've done research. So they're trying to get you hooked on them. So when you have someone that says, hey, I like the same stuff as you, for people with ADHD that have run into having issues with forming relationships and feeling less than, this can be really intriguing and intoxicating. So we have to be really careful because we are more likely to be prey for people like this. So we also are more likely to have a history of PTSD. There are genetic markers that make people with ADHD more prone to developing post-traumatic stress disorder after trauma. That is also something that this type of personality goes after. They go after people that are vulnerable. And that also includes people with anxiety, depression, or any other medical condition. And also grief too. So if you're going through grief, they may target you. So if you've recently lost a spouse, gone through a breakup, they will hone in on that. They will try to find your weakest spot and exploit it. So we have also been told as people with ADHD to not trust our intuition, that there's something wrong with our brains, so we can't make our own decisions. And so when someone says, you know what, I'll take over all the decision-making stuff, sometimes that can be really attractive to us, right? Because we haven't felt comfortable with our own decisions. We've been told that they're wrong. We're also more likely to have a history of abuse. That is also part of Barclay's research. He found that people with ADHD are more likely to have a history of childhood abuse. So when you have a family of origin where there's been abuse, you're more likely to have a relationship with abuse. Because again, you look to your parents as the way to do relationships. So you think that this is normal. And also a healthy relationship may seem kind of boring to you. That here's someone that just kind of is okay with just like discussing something and resolving it. And here's someone that you may not feel sparks in chemistry with, and that can be boring. But I read a quote somewhere that says that like the feeling of instant chemistry is a red flag, that puts your brain on autopilot. And we really need to be aware of what we're doing and really check in with ourselves and go, you know what, is this person doing things in our best interest, or does this just feel good to my brain? So also we are likely to have a cycle of guilt and shame because of ADHD. So when you have someone that's being abusive and is shaming and guilting you, especially about ADHD and weaponizing against you, that can be a really familiar feeling. And you may feel like on some level that you deserve it. And so people will get kind of in the cycle of guilt and shame, or they'll do what's called a shame hit, which means that you're having a pretty good day, but all of a sudden you remember something that you did that is shameful to you, and then you'll feel bad because feeling good starts feeling suspicious. And the people that do this kind of behavior, they're not abusive all the time, which can be really confusing. They can also have moments where they give you positive reinforcement and tell you what a great person you are. They will have moments where they seem to be caring towards other people. They may even seem more caring towards people they don't know than to you. But if someone's abusive, 5% of your relationship, it's still an abusive relationship. We need to keep that in mind. We also have this issue with this thing called stop loss, which means if we've invested time and effort into a relationship, we're more likely to continue the relationship than end it because of this sunken cost, which means that we don't want to walk away from something that we feel we've invested time in. So also we tend to unconsciously seek someone that's pulled together. And what I mean by that is someone that is good with money management, the things that we're not, right? Because we tend to be attracted to compliments. So, and I mean compliments with an E, not an I. And what I mean by that is here's someone that looks really good on paper. They seem educated. They seem like they have their act together. They may seem like they have good relationships, and they seem to be pretty organized. But the flip side of that is it can be controlling behavior. There's a flip side to all behaviors, right? So like ADHD, we have issues with organization. The flip side is that we can be pretty fun to be around, right? We're pretty good with, being able to come up with stuff on our own. But when you have someone with this type of personality, that kind of pulled togetherness can also turn into control. So keep that in mind. If you meet somebody and you're like, wow, they're really organized and they really can do money management, sometimes it goes into being controlling and not giving you access to money. So also, again, keep in mind that our relationships tend to start out pretty intensely. We get those dopamine hits from people. So, but this is different in that this is a concerted effort to make you question your reality. And again, it's a form of abuse. And everyone's vulnerable to gaslighting. If you think you're not vulnerable to gaslighting, you are. And that is ADHD people or non-ADHD people. Everyone's at risk of being manipulated. It just depends on the intensity of the manipulation. But again, people with ADHD, depression, anxiety, grief, other medical conditions are all more vulnerable to this type of person. So here's some quotes from people I've worked with. So he told me that I needed to go to therapy because my ADHD was intolerable. When we got there, he told the therapist I need to be fixed. He didn't take responsibility for any of his behavior, including slamming me into a wall. I have had couples that I speak to. Right now I'm doing all telehealth. And I have had couples I speak to that maybe one partner will, I have questionnaires I have people fill out ahead of time, and maybe the person's not honest on the questionnaire. But one of the things you'll see is that there's a question on my questionnaire that says, what behaviors do you think have contributed to the issues you're having in your relationship? And a gaslighter will usually answer that with, if anything, I've just been too kind and I've been too understanding. And there's a lot of martyr behavior. But I have had people that have told me that the other person has the problem and they're not the problem. And that means, yes, they are the problem, because there's something about that not taking responsibility that's a real tip off that the person is abusive. Because healthy people say, you know what, I had this behavior. I'm ashamed of it. I need to change it. And they will sincerely apologize. A proper apology isn't, I'm sorry you got upset when I did blah, because that's putting it on you. But if they say, I'm sorry that this happened, that I did this thing, here's how I'm trying to make that right, and here's what I'm doing to make sure it doesn't happen again, that's a proper apology. People need to own their behavior. Also, if you're being blamed for your reaction to their behavior, that's also a red flag. This is not workable and possibly abusive. So that means that someone does something that's inappropriate, you get upset about it, and they blame you for being upset and tell you that, you have no right to get upset about that. That's not something people get upset about. Whatever feeling you have a legitimate right to that feeling, regardless of whether the person agrees with you having that feeling or not. So also another quote is, she told me I didn't need to take my Adderall, that it was making me out of control. I think what I was doing was helping me see more clearly that I shouldn't be treated this way, and I was speaking out. His wife flushed all his Adderall and also called his psychiatrist and told the psychiatrist, left a message, with various lies about him. And so you'll see this where if you're getting better, the gaslighter will scramble trying to keep you under their control. So anytime that you're seeking help, they will see that as a threat to their dominance. My husband would hide my prized possessions, and when I couldn't find them, he'd blame my ADHD. This has happened to several people. I cannot even tell you how many, that they will tend to hide things of great monetary or sentimental value. Like they'll hide wedding rings and then blame you for, if you were more serious about a relationship, it wasn't for your ADHD, you wouldn't lose something this important, and they're hiding your stuff. He'd say I was irresponsible, couldn't be trusted. When I couldn't find my wedding ring, he accused me of not caring about him or our marriage. I started putting sticky notes saying where I put things. That's how I eventually caught what he was doing. I told him I was done. He held me at gunpoint. I was not going to get out of this relationship alive. I left 3 years ago in the middle of the night with just my dog, and I closed my back and I cut off contact. I'm still working on rebuilding my life. So this type of behavior, this emotional abuse, is a segue to physical abuse. And it's a segue to your relationship being possibly lethal. So you have to be very careful. So what's recommended is going no contact or low contact. No contact means you block all forms of communication. You block phone numbers, you block emails, you block social media accounts, because these people will purposely provoke you over social media. They will post things that are comments about your relationship. They'll post stuff that only you know about in the relationship. They will threaten to post. They'll blackmail you and threaten to post stuff about you online. They will find a new source of narcissistic supply, or the person they were cheating on you with, and they will start posting it all over social media. So you want to block their social media accounts. Also, sometimes you can't do no contact because you share kids. So in that case, low contact is recommended. So you can do something called parallel parenting. And I have a podcast called Talking Brains. And I, amongst episodes on ADHD, I also talk about gaslighting. And also there's a couple episodes on parallel co-parenting, which is where you have a little contact with the other parent as possible, because there's so high conflict. It could be that you only should speak through a co-parenting app, because every time you talk with this person on the phone or you do emails, the person purposely tries to goad you into getting a reaction. So this person will fight you in court just to fight you, to keep up that emotional connection. So That means, setting time limits to calls or visits, having a person with you. So if you're around somebody in your family of origin that's a gaslighter and you have to attend a family event, it means bringing somebody with you and limiting your amount of time at that event. And also, I tell people I have a nonverbal cue between the two of you that means I need to get out of here now. Or you just decide, you know what, this isn't worth it. I'm going to get together with other members of my family on my own time, just not meet with this person. So there's also something called the gray rock technique, which means that you respond to this type of person as boring a way as possible with no emotion, just like you're a rock. So you'll have someone that's a gaslighter, bring up really personal, detailed information. They know what buttons to push. So if they say, you're stupid and you can't focus, you go, okay, well, maybe that's true. And if you say maybe that's true, they usually stop because they're not getting any reaction out of you. You're not saying yes, you're not saying no. There's some in the middle. So you want to be as boring as possible and not give them reaction. You're also humans. People can only take so much too. So you want to also give yourself some grace too, that this type of personality can be very difficult to keep your cool around. So the best thing to do is just really limit your contact or cut off contact. These people tend to not get better. So if you're co-parenting with a gaslighter, get a good family law attorney. If you cannot afford one, there are a lot of family law attorneys that work pro bono, which means at no charge, especially in cases of domestic violence, or low bono, which means they have a sliding scale. So you pay based on your income. Have a detailed parenting plan. A parenting plan says, when you're going to have the kids, on what days and what times. A detailed parenting plan says specifically where you're going to exchange the children, at what time, how long do you need to wait for the other person. If the other person messages you on a co-parenting app, then if you need to respond in a certain amount of time. And what I see sometimes is a passive aggressive behavior from the gaslighter. So what they'll do is you'll ask them a question about something coming up in the kid's life, in the next 48 hours, and they refuse to answer. And I have seen parenting plans that say if the other parent does not answer in a certain amount of time, then you get to make the decision. And the co-parenting app will see that the person's read it. So if they say, well, I didn't see it, then you've got documentation of that. That's why I tend to recommend using co-parenting app. Also, a parent coordinator is someone either appointed by the court or you can privately hire them. It's usually a psychologist or mental health counselor or social worker that they are especially trained in handling high conflict co-parenting. And so you will meet with them to try and get to a point where the other person is held accountable and you're more likely to have not the best co-parenting because it's really hard with this personality, but a better chance of having a lower amount of stress in your life. Also beware of parental alienation. You can have it put in your parenting plan that the children should not be told to call you by your first name. That's a form of parental alienation in case your kids start calling you by your first name rather than mom or dad. So you may also see that the parent is talking badly about you to the kids. That's a real common one. You just want to keep documentation of that because if you go to an attorney, they're going to want to see documentation of these things happening. So you want to put the date, direct quotes. I've also had people that have had their cars tracked. They took their car to a dealership and found out that there was a tracker placed on their car. So that was particularly when a spouse or former spouse was showing up at really odd times and locations. And that's how they discovered that they were being tracked. So if you work for a gaslighter, try to not be alone with them at any point during your workday. Also, they will try to figure out ways to do that. So they'll tell everybody that they had the day off, but you're the only one that shows up. Get out of there pronto. You are not obligated to stay there. Look up your employer's human resources harassment policy. Sometimes the Equal Opportunity Commission that is the organization in the federal government that kind of oversees your rights in the workplace. They have their own harassment policy, but sometimes you need to report it through your work's human resource department. There are some workplaces that do not need to have a human resource department or the EEOC says, they don't need to follow a harassment policy. So I always recommend get a labor attorney. And at the same time, too, if you're being targeted because of your ADHD, get an attorney that also specializes in Americans with Disabilities Act. And again, maintain documentation of who you've talked with, what they've said to you, direct quotes, places, dates. and keep that information on your own device. If you put that information on an employee-owned device, like a laptop or a phone, when you quit or you're fired, one of the first things they'll do is confiscate those. So you want to make sure that you're maintaining that documentation on your own device. Also, I've worked with people that they've had their items moved around on their desk, or their computer's been used. They've logged in, and the person is told, "Well, you have ADHD, so you can't be trusted." When in fact, the person is having items moved on them. So again, we have to be very aware that any form of domestic violence, including emotional abuse, increases lethality in relationship or the chances that you will be killed. So staying in a toxic relationship, also your kids are learning that that's how you treat people. They may be possibly being abused themselves. They are being pitted against you. And usually what I see in this type of relationship is as kids get older, because the other parent is so volatile, they will get mad at the innocent party, the other parent, rather than get mad at the gaslighter, because they have a lot more to lose if they get mad at the gaslighter. So also take your pets with you if you leave. These people are known for abusing pets. I have an article in Psychology Today where I talk about narcissists and pets, that they can either treat pets better than people, or, and I mean excessively so. God knows I treat my dogs like royalty, but this is different. This is like treating them better than, like, they won't buy food for the kids, but they'll buy food for the dog. That's what I'm talking about. Or they will threaten to hurt your pets, or they will neglect them. So many domestic violence shelters are now accepting pets. They were not before maybe, but they are now. And also many veterinarians' offices will board your pet at no charge to you if there's a domestic violence situation. And keep in mind too, the most lethal time is when you leave the relationship, or the gaslighter gets wind that you're leaving the relationship. And of course, if there are firearms on site, you have a much, I think it's about 10 times higher rate of lethality in your relationship. So post-relationship, you may feel really a sense of just emptiness, lack of self-worth, because you've been even told what your likes and dislikes are. You may not even remember those anymore. You may have a relationship or be in a family of origin where your parents were gaslighters, and they had a scapegoat and a golden child, and those roles would flip based on who they thought was being loyal to them. So you may find that the roles have changed, that your sibling that was the scapegoat is now the golden child, and now you're the terrible one. Parents will threaten to disown the adult children. I worked with one person who said that their parent threatened to disown them so many times they just didn't even care anymore. You will see sometimes the toxic person will find new narcissistic supply and then drop the family and the kids like a hot potato. And that sense of abandonment can be devastating. And they may also try to contact you through what are called flying monkeys. Flying monkeys, like Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch would send monkeys out to deliver her messages. So these are people that know both of you, and they will find you and say, hey, so-and-so is so sad that you left, and they really want to make this work, and why don't you contact them? And you need to be very clear with people that we are not going to talk about this person. That's a no-fly zone, as I call it. And if the person continues to talk about them, you may need to walk away. And you may find, too, that when you reconnect with other people in your life that you've been isolated from, you may start seeing that they have some pretty toxic behaviors as well. So it's really important to educate ourselves and educate kids as early as possible about just having good boundaries with adults, good boundaries with friends. Also, consistent treatment for ADHD. We are more likely to make clear decisions. We're more likely to think ahead. We're more likely to pace ourselves when we have the appropriate medication on board. Stimulants have been found to be the most effective form of treatment for ADHD. They're also non-stimulants, but in head-to-head studies, stimulants are more effective. Also, cognitive behavioral therapy and research has been shown to be quite effective for treating ADHD and depression and anxiety. There's also other forms of therapy like dialectical behavior therapy, solution-focused therapy, and learn the red flags. So one of the things you can tell if you're on a date with someone, first date with someone that is a gaslighter, is they will ask you inappropriately personal questions like, what's your biggest fear? What's your biggest loss? What's your biggest shame in life? And they're not doing that to develop an emotional connection with you. They're doing that to gather data. Because when you get into an argument with them or you tell them no, one of the first things they'll go to is something that you feel shameful about. oh, no wonder your sister doesn't talk to you. And you remember that you told them about this on your first date. So they collect ammunition. They collect whatever your darkest fears are, and they will use them against you. One of the other things that they tend to do is go after your ability to parent, because that's an area that most people are sensitive about. So they tend to go after that because they know that's going to be a sore spot. So again, it's also the way they treat wait staff at restaurants. If you have someone that is yelling at wait staff, is not treating them appropriately, you want to just get up and leave. And I know that sometimes people tell me, well, I don't want to be rude. Sometimes you just need to get away from these people, because the more you spend time with them, the more you're going to get sucked into their schemes. So, questions?
Sorry about that. I was busy going through all of the really, really tough and important questions that we've been receiving. So I'm going to get right into them and just start by very quickly thanking again our sponsor, Inflow, for sponsoring the webinar. Okay, Dr. Sarkis, so much here. The first and probably most prevalent question is, we talked a lot here today about how people with ADHD may be more susceptible to all of these toxic behaviors. Can they also be more likely to exhibit these toxic behaviors?
Yeah. I don't want to say that people with ADHD won't engage in these behaviors, because they can. Anybody is susceptible not only to being a victim to this type of personality, but also being this kind of personality. And again, if you had parents that had these types of behaviors, you may be more likely to not only be a victim, but also a perpetrator as well. But the important thing is, if you are having these behaviors, that you seek help from a mental health professional, because if you know that you're doing something that's just not helping you develop good relationships, talking it out with someone can be life-changing.
Right. And a couple people here saying that they've been in relationships with people with ADHD who they don't necessarily believe that they are manipulating on purpose. But for example, the dopamine hit that you mentioned in that idealization phase could cause what looks like love bombing. Does it matter really if you're on the other end of that, whether they're doing it on purpose?
Yeah. Abusive behavior is abusive, regardless of how the person came to that. So that's something to keep in mind, because you will hear, like, if you try to leave a gaslighter, they'll say, but, the way I was treated when I was a kid, or the way this happened. No, you're still absolutely 100% responsible for abusive behavior. So, so again, anybody can engage in this behavior, and anybody can be a victim of it.
Okay. And we got an interesting question from someone, an adult with ADHD, who said that they actually find that they are attracted to attention of any kind. Sometimes that can be bad attention. And how do they know if they are actually exhibiting narcissistic behaviors or otherwise abusive behaviors? How can they recognize it in themselves? Yeah.
Sometimes ADHD behavior can be mistaken for narcissism. Part of that is that we are just trying to get through the day. So someone may be talking to us and we aren't listening to them, or we're not paying attention, or not processing. And sometimes that can be looked at as being self-centered. So I always go to a mental health professional that you can talk to them about, hey, I don't know what's going on. I don't know if I have narcissism along with my ADHD or instead of, but I would go to someone that definitely specializes in ADHD. And if they can specialize also in narcissistic abuse, that's a definite plus. But keep in mind too, that if you have ADHD, that there are some behaviors that can be misinterpreted as narcissistic.
Right. One woman wrote in to say, as an ADHD person, I'm so used to being told that I'm the problem that I can't tell anymore.
Right. Yes. That's what makes us especially vulnerable. It's because we're told we're less than, we're told that we don't fit in. We're told that our brains don't work like everyone else's. So again, in the idealization phase, where you're told that your ADHD is wonderful and you're a great person, that is so intoxicating to us. And especially if, like the other attendee said about that, that attraction to excitement and to attention, that can be a real lure for us. So we have to be super careful about that.
Right. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about rejection sensitive dysphoria. It's a common occurrence with ADHD, and how it may make it difficult, perhaps, for someone with ADHD to leave a relationship.
Sure. So rejection sensitive dysphoria, it's not a diagnosed condition yet, but what it is that when you are faced with rejection, whether that's personal rejection, like friendships or relationships or at work, it tends to hit us, people with ADHD, harder than other people. We tend to not bounce back as quickly, or we tend to really beat ourselves up about that. And that could be rooted in the fact that we tend to make social errors because of our executive function issues. It could be that we also tend to blame ourselves. And that's where getting appropriate treatment for ADHD is so important. And that also includes, we have a high rate of depression and anxiety, which also makes us more vulnerable to gaslighters. So that can mean that you stay in a relationship longer because you don't want to deal with that rejection. But also keep in mind, when you're with an abusive person, you're getting rejected on a daily basis.
Yes. This question echoes a lot of other ones we received from concerned parents and other loved ones. This particular person wrote in to say that her son, who is 16, has ADHD as well as anxiety and depression. He is in a relationship, his girlfriend and he fight constantly. She recently slapped him, and she feels that her son is tangled in a toxic relationship, but he said that all he wants is to be with her. What? And we received many questions like this. How can you help, especially an adolescent with ADHD? Can you help them? And if so, what steps could parents take to help them break free? Education
about healthy boundaries is so important. And you need to make sure that you're also demonstrating that at home with your own partner. So that means that sometimes you need to limit contact with that person. I'm from the benevolent dictatorship school of parenting, which means your kids, you're the CEO of the family, so you can limit contact with that person. Now, it's difficult. They go to school together, and there may be like a Romeo and Juliet thing where they, try harder to be together, but there maybe need to be some real limits, especially if there's physical abuse involved. And it may be that you need to press charges too, if there's physical abuse involved. But also educate people about what an abusive relationship is. If you have an adult child, it's letting them know that, hey, I don't think this relationship's healthy, but I will support you in any way I can. And then that person knows that when the relationship does end, because they inevitably do, that they have a soft place to land and they can talk to you without judgment. But it's really important to let them know that you are there to support them and that you want to be able to have open communication. That being said, if you're with an adult child and they're telling you information that it's really hurting you to hear, you let them know that and say, you know what, the stuff you're telling me, my heart aches for you, and I can't hear anymore because it's really hurtful. So I want to be supportive of you, but I also need to set my own boundaries, and that's okay, and that's understandable.
Okay. Now, of course, there are questions on the flip side of this. Someone wrote in to say, how does this work when your parents are the ones that are engaging in triangulation and love bombing and the other toxic behaviors?
Right. And maybe that you have to set some limits, and that's where we go no contact or low contact. And again, that decision is not made lightly. That's a decision that is really hard for people to reach. But if you have someone that is not taking responsibility for their behavior, you may need to limit your amount of contact with them. And that means that limiting phone calls, or if the phone call starts getting to be abusive in nature, that you say, okay, I need to go now. Because this type of person, when you confront them and say, hey, the way you've been towards me is abusive, it usually doesn't change things because they're so entrenched in their behavior and they feel like they have a right to it. And you may find that when you're confronting them, their gaslighting gets even worse. So you really have to look at what's in your best interest. What is in the interest of your happiness? What is the interest of your joy in life? And is this person someone that gives you energy or constantly takes it away? Is this a person that makes you feel bad about yourself? Is this a person that lifts you up, or is this a person that continually cuts you down, even in front of other people? And sometimes we just need to set a very clear boundary with people and say, you know what, we're not going to tolerate being treated like that. And that's where gray rock technique or also just walking away is super helpful. But it's hard to do, especially if you've been conditioned to think that this behavior is acceptable or normal. And you're also under no obligation to care for an aging parent that is abusive. And that's something I think that is also hard, especially for people with ADHD, is that you're told that, blood's thicker than water and, honor your parents and all this stuff. If you're an adult and your parent is abusive to you, I'll say that again, you're under no obligation to provide caretaking for them. And that's something that people can be really guilted and shamed into doing. A person that is sick or is dying does not become less narcissistic. They actually get worse.
That is such an important point. I feel like I've never heard that before. And I'm glad you repeated it. What an important thing to keep in mind. For the sandwich generation, right?
Right. Yeah. When bad things happen to narcissists, it doesn't make them less bad. Right. It doesn't make them less narcissistic. It actually amps them up.
A related question here. Is it possible that someone who has engaged in gaslighting behavior, that it could diminish if they start to get treatment for anxiety or depression or conditions that may be in some way contributing to their behaviors? Could you see someone sort of recover from gaslighting?
I think it's important to for the person to admit that they are having abusive behavior. And that means accepting responsibility for it and also discussing how this came about. That's the important thing, because abuse, of course, anxiety and depression, if that is resolved or that decreases, you're more likely to be able to discuss other problematic behavior. But I think it's really important that for people to get help for it, they need to come to terms with the fact that this is something that's pathological and is not good for them and not good for the people around them. And attend regular therapy. Not just go once and then say, well, the therapist said I'm fine, I don't need to go back. I've heard that so many times from people, and that we're probably not going to do that. We're not going to say like, oh, you're fine, you don't need to come back. Or the person will say, I know more than the therapist. That's a real tip off to a gaslighter or a narcissist.
Another red flag. And you mentioned earlier that it is a real concern among some caregivers that their children may pick up on these toxic behaviors. Can you offer any advice for those caregivers who have been living with gaslighting and other toxic behaviors from their spouse? They're concerned about their children and they want to intervene.
Sure. I think that we need to look at that enabling this type of behavior, especially with children, can be just as toxic as the gaslighting behavior. And what I mean by that is witnessing this type of behavior towards your children and not stepping in or being silent about it is just as detrimental as the gaslighting they're doing. And that's a really tough place to be in, but there needs to be a point where you say enough. And I encourage people to really look at what are your lines in the sand? What are your deal breakers? Because those deal breakers can change over time, or that line keeps moving. And so you need to have some really firm boundaries about what you're going to tolerate. And also keep in mind, what are your kids learning about how you treat other people? And it may be that, being by yourself or being alone is actually less lonely than being with someone that abuses you.
Right. So important to say that out loud. We heard from one woman who wrote in to say she's recovering from a divorce with a narcissist. She met a therapist who met with both of us told me he was a covert narcissist. She also got an ADHD diagnosis while in the marriage that she says her ex-spouse used against her. And so she asks, do you have any recommendations on how to recover from this narcissistic abuse, especially since he's dragging out the divorce?
I think it really is something to talk to your attorney about. And attorneys, family law attorneys, good family law attorneys know about narcissism and the different tactics that are used by narcissists and their counsel. I think that's important. It's important to continue going to regular therapy. Make sure you have a good connection with your therapist. Sometimes you have to go to a couple different therapists to find a good fit, and that's okay. But also there's going to be possibly an inherent amount of stress from co-parenting with a toxic person. I think it's really important also that kids attend therapy as well, because they are going to need to talk about stuff that is going to be hard to talk to either parent about because you're the parents. So especially for little ones, going to play therapy is a really helpful way for them to discuss their feelings. Kids don't really use like feeling words. They're more likely to act it out in play. So I think it's really important that everybody gets the support services they need. And also to go easy on yourself too. I think that we tend to, with ADHD, we tend to be very hard on ourselves. And it's okay if you're having a rough day and you just need to just get through the day. That's okay. It's okay to not feel good. It's okay to not be okay.
Mm-hmm. We're just about out of time, but I'm wondering as a final question, if you can recommend, so obviously a first step for people who are looking to end a toxic relationship and get to a safe place for themselves and perhaps for their children. It sounds like therapy as well as legal counsel. Are there support groups available as well for individuals who are navigating this?
There are also support groups available online as well. On reddit.com, there's a subforum or subreddit called Narcissistic Abuse. There's also one called, I think it's Toxic Parents. Something like that, narcissistic parents. And so people share their stories. And so there can be camaraderie in that. And there's a concept, this universality where when you realize you're not the only person that's been through this, it's very healing and cathartic. Also educate yourself as much as possible. I've got my gaslighting and toxic relationship books available on my website. It's stephaniesarkis.com. There's also articles on there, podcast episodes. There's also a lot of really good clinicians out there that specialize in helping people with ADHD and people that have suffered narcissistic abuse, help them out. And you can rebuild and you can have a happier life.
That is a wonderful note to end on. And a note to our listeners that the Attitude team, we will do our best to gather links to these resources as well so that you have some next steps there. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. And thank you to Dr. Sarkis for contributing to this really tough, but really important conversation. We really appreciate your time and expertise today.
You're welcome.
For everyone, we hope you will come back because there were, 500 questions. And we hope everyone else that you will join us for more Attitude webinars. And to find out what all of our upcoming webinars are, as well as our articles and research updates, just sign up at attitudemag.com/newsletters and you will always know what is going on. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 410 to access the slides, the webinar replay, and the certificate of attendance option. If you support the work we're doing here at Attitude, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine. If you do so now, you will receive our forthcoming fall issue, which features an article from Dr. Sarkis on the topic of love bombing, among many others. So thank you, Dr. Sarkis. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.